Back in 2019, when I was 24, I finally managed to save enough cash to move out of my parents' house. It was a big deal for me, moving into a place of my own, a house with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, about a 20-minute drive from where my parents lived. Having my own space was something I had been dreaming about for ages. No more chores, no parents nagging about every little thing, and most importantly, the freedom to live by my own rules. The house I moved into was pretty decent-sized for the price. It wasn't brand new or anything, but it had a cozy vibe to it. The neighborhood itself was pretty quiet, mostly filled with families and a few retired folks. It had that typical suburban feel, lawns well taken care of, a couple of parks nearby, and streets lined with trees that looked really nice when they changed colors in the fall. It wasn't too far out from the city, just a 20-minute drive, which was perfect for getting to work or hanging out with friends downtown. I had just started to get used to my home when something happened that winter, which kind of turned my independence on its head. It was the day before New Year's Eve, and I was out all day buying some drinks and food for a party I was having the next day. I got home just after dark. I was chilling in my room that evening, just relaxing and watching some YouTube on my phone. It was around 11 p.m., a time when everything's usually quiet. Ironically, I remember watching horror videos that night. I was beginning to fall asleep when I heard this loud knocking at my front door. It immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Who knocks on someone's door at this hour? At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor or someone lost, needing help, but the late-night timing made me nervous. I tried to just ignore it, hoping they'd go away, but then, a few minutes later, they knocked again, even louder this time. I cautiously peeked out of my window and saw this big guy, dressed all in black, standing at my door. There was something off about him, and my gut told me not to open the door. He wasn't giving up. He started trying to force the door open. It was locked, thankfully, but that didn't seem to deter him. He kept at it, trying to break the door down. I didn't think to call the police right away. Instead, I grabbed the Glock I had from my dad and waited quietly behind the living room couch watching the front door. Then, the situation escalated quickly. The man broke the glass on the door and managed to unlock it from the inside. He opened the door and we came face to face. It was one of those moments where everything feels surreal. I could see him reaching into his pocket, and I didn't want to take any chances. I fired a shot toward him, and he realized I wasn't messing around and bolted out of there. I popped off a few more rounds in his direction, but it was dark, and I don't think any of them hit before he got away. The cops came after I called them, but by then the guy was long gone. They asked me a bunch of questions, but there wasn't much to go on. After that night, my landlord upgraded the security of the place. We got a stronger door without a big window. He installed security alarms and cameras around the property, and even reduced my rent to convince me to stay. He said the neighborhood was generally safe, and this was just a one-off incident. I chose to stay because, despite what happened, I valued my independence. Living alone post-incident was different, though. I was more alert, more cautious. I started double-checking the locks every night, making sure every door and window was secured. And every night, without fail, I'd lock my bedroom door before going to bed. It was my new routine, a way to feel a bit safer in my own home. I'm glad that my dad gave me that Glock before I moved out. Otherwise, things may have turned out very differently that night. I lived alone in a quaint house in a rural part of Vermont. The community was small, comprising a few dozen houses scattered around, but it was a decent drive from the nearest town. I had been residing in that house for about 4 years, enjoying the quiet and the lush greenery that surrounded the area. My job was a typical 9 to 5 in the town, so I spent most weekdays commuting and getting back home around 6 in the evening. This incident happened last year, and it's the reason I ended up selling my house and moving closer to town. The thought of what happened still sends shivers down my spine. One morning, like any other, I woke up, got ready for work, grabbed a quick cup of coffee, and then headed out. The day at work was uneventful, and by the time I returned home, it was already dark. Once inside, I tossed my bag onto a kitchen chair and started rummaging through the pantry for dinner options. That's when I noticed something odd. The coffee jar from this morning was missing. I was sure where I had left it, but it was nowhere to be found. I felt a bit unnerved and confused, wondering if I was losing track of things. Eventually, I shrugged it off, made some dinner, and tried to relax for the rest of the evening. By 10 p.m., I was pretty beat and decided to call it a night. I went to the kitchen to grab a water bottle, and that's when I noticed something chilling. Through the back door, at the edge of my yard, there was a figure standing among the trees, just beyond the light's reach. I couldn't make out any details, just a silhouette that vanished into the woods after a few moments. The sight was unsettling, but I couldn't figure out what exactly I had seen. I switched off the lights and headed to bed, though I didn't sleep well. The next morning was routine, getting ready for work and heading to the kitchen. To my surprise, the coffee jar was back in its usual spot. I couldn't make sense of it, considering I was certain it wasn't there the night before. The day at work was tough. I couldn't stop thinking about the missing coffee and the figure outside my house. That Friday, I got off work early and drove home, feeling a bit anxious. As soon as I stepped in, something felt off. I couldn't pinpoint what it was, but something wasn't right. I cautiously walked into the kitchen. Everything seemed normal. But then I heard a noise from the living room. My heart raced as I called out if anyone was there, but got no response. I crept into the living room, scanning the area and checking behind furniture. Nothing. Just as I was about to head upstairs, I heard footsteps in the kitchen. I turned and saw a man at the end of the hallway. We locked eyes, and for a moment, everything just froze. Then, I dashed out the front door, with the sound of his footsteps close behind. I ran to my neighbor's house, where they called the police for me. The cops arrived, but the intruder had vanished. They found a broken window hinge, indicating how he got in and out. Even more disturbing, they discovered evidence that this guy had been in my house for a while, using my stuff and eating my food. There was no telling how long it had been happening. After that terrifying encounter, I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I moved in with relatives and put the house up for sale. The image of that man standing in my hallway, those blank, emotionless eyes staring at me, haunted me for a long time. I didn't know if he was dangerous or just squatting in my house, but either way, I couldn't bear the thought of living there any longer. Growing up, I lived with my mom in a pretty regular suburban house. Throughout high school, she worked night shifts at the hospital, so most nights it was just me at home until about 4 a.m. This incident happened a few weeks before I was set to graduate. Like any typical evening, around 7:30 p.m., I waved goodbye to my mom and settled in for some gaming. It was a school night, so I didn't plan on pulling an all-nighter, but I still stayed up way past my bedtime. Around midnight, I finally powered down my console and headed to my room. I remember scrolling through my phone for what felt like an eternity before drifting off to sleep. Suddenly, I woke up to the sound of a door creaking downstairs. I squinted at my clock. It was just past 3 a.m. I figured maybe my mom came home early for some reason. But then I heard footsteps, oddly slow and methodical, pacing through the house. It struck me as strange because usually my mom would come straight upstairs after her shift. Lying there, listening intently, I realized that these footsteps weren't stopping or even pausing. They just kept moving from room to room. My initial sleepiness turned into a gnawing sense of dread. Something felt off. With a rush of adrenaline, I flipped on my bedroom light. As soon as I did, the footsteps ceased. Heart pounding, I cautiously opened my door and peered into the dark hallway. No lights were on downstairs, which was bizarre. If it was my mom, she'd have at least turned on the hallway light. Quiet as I could, I tiptoed down the corridor to the top of the stairs. Kneeling down, I tried to catch a glimpse of the living room. Nothing seemed amiss, but the unnerving silence was getting to me. I called out for my mom, but got no answer. Creeping down the stairs, I reached the bottom and hesitantly walked towards the kitchen. That's when I saw it, a muddy boot print on the floor. My heart sank. This wasn't right. Raising my eyes, I froze. Across the kitchen, a figure sat at our dining table. He was dressed in dark clothes, and a ski mask obscured his face. He just sat there, eerily still, his gaze fixed on me. The moment felt surreal, like a scene straight out of a horror movie. I bolted back upstairs, locking myself in my room, and dialed 911. I whispered frantically to the operator, explaining the situation. While on the phone, I heard the intruder's footsteps slowly move towards the staircase. My heart raced, but then I heard the front door open and close. The intruder was leaving. Moments later, headlights illuminated my room. It was my mom, back from her shift. I rushed outside, tears streaming down my face, and explained everything. The police arrived shortly after, but the intruder was long gone. They did a thorough search but found no clues to his identity. The most unsettling part was that nothing was stolen, not even my gaming console, which was in plain sight. The police speculated that the intruder might have been watching our routine, knowing when my mom would usually get back. It was a chilling thought, considering the timing of his entry and exit. If I hadn't checked the kitchen when I did, or if my mom had come home just a bit earlier, I dread to think what might have happened. Following that night, we installed a security system and always double-checked the locks before bed. The incident left me shaken for quite some time. It was a harsh reminder that even in the safety of your own home, you can never be too cautious.